Hey everyone, with the conclusion of the Dark Sphere Regional, I now have quite a lot of material to work with for the next week or so. I'll have a lot of videos regarding my deck building process and some of the games that I've played on stream. I'll be shedding some light on my strategic analysis and thought processes while also sculpting some really unorthodox card choices in my decks, so there's something for everyone. Today I'll begin on the runner side. I played Siphon Kate, which went 5 and 3 on the day. My first game was a win. I forgot the ID of my opponent, but I remember it was the awesome Emily Miller. So sorry, I forgot your deck. The next three opponents all sported some form of spiky Palana, which is super annoying considering that it was probably James's and my deck that spurred a lot of people to try it out for themselves, which almost ended up being my demise. I still managed to conquer two of the three spiky Palanas, but the last one was piloted by Kester, and boy is he such a cheeky, sneaky person. Mad respect to Kester, he flatlined me in the most humiliating way possible, but I absolutely loved it. Following that was a match against Regional 2016 champion Alice, who was sporting her NEH flatline deck. Somehow, even through siphons, I still managed to stay clear of the flatline and achieve victory. Following that, I was ushered into the cut in the worst possible matchup possible. I was up against Alex White's IG prison deck. Somehow or another, I miraculously managed to top deck enough agendas to secure the win. So all in all, Siphon Cape was a very good choice when it came to most of the matches, but it just completely faltered against the uncrackable New Angeles Sol piloted by the eventual winner, Brandon Jackson, who I had to face twice. Despite knowing his deck slightly more the second time round, I was still not able to crack his deck and end up in runners-up. So let's head to Netrunner DB, where I break down the deck and shed some insight as to how I decided to build my deck. This is not a net deck, this is completely built on my own and tested in secrecy before the tournament. I had about 1 week's worth of practice with it and felt relatively comfortable, mostly because a good portion of the deck was based off the now defunct prepaid Kate. Some of the draw, economy, and most of the breakers are all part of the prepaid Kate shell, and these are really powerful and efficient, despite some of them still being on the most modded list. That said, with prepaid voice pairs out of the equation, we need more efficient econ and draw engines, and that is where our good friend, the professor, comes in with Proco, and that synergizes incredibly well with Hyperdriver. Can you imagine drawing 7 cards and gaining 7 credits during a turn? That's insane. Of course you won't do it. You will flat your hand, you'll discard a lot of cards. But the amount of tempo that Hyperdriver gives you is huge. It is absolutely essential for contesting against the faster corps such as Rashi, NEH, or Palana. Because gaining 3 extra clicks over the corp is nearly gaining an entire turn over them. And when you have the tempo advantage, you can leverage on this to assault their centrals earlier, to set up before they can find a good scoring remote quicker. It's just so good, and it's incredible in conjunction with professional contacts. Daily Cast rounds off the economic suite because giving 5 credits for a single click and card is pretty good. Because of professional contacts, this is also a reason why I cut the number of diesels to 2. The other reason being that I'm already on 45 cards. If I had more cards, diesel would be nice, a third diesel, because opening with diesel show gamble is one of the best things you can do, even though diesel is pretty much a dead card once you have Proco installed. Now we move into the heart, the core of what defines this deck. The 2 account siphons and 3 same old things to recur them.
Okay, much better. No more reverberation. Let's continue. So, why account siphon in Kate? The first question you ask is why not just Minder? And the answer is pretty simple. The surprise factor. It can't be overrated. Cards like Vamp and Apocalypse are so much more devastating when your opponent doesn't see them coming, and account siphon is no exception to that. Quite a lot of my opponents left their HQs unguarded for a very long period during the game, until I drew my first siphon. So it's not absolutely necessary to see the account siphon early. I can still draw it mid-game, and it's still pretty effective, because most people don't put more than 1 ice on HQ. And But if you can get a very good turn where you siphon into same old siphon, the credit swing is so huge that your opponent is just reeling to recover. And this synergizes very well with the entire deck. The reason why my Breaker Suite is so disposable, in the sense that there are no permanent solutions for 4+ strength sentries, is that you are not meant to run through ice frequently. There is no efficient way to break multiple assassins or multiple toll booths for that matter. What you really want to do is to keep the corp so poor they cannot res these ice in the first place. Most people deal with the aforementioned ice by running cards such as Hunting Grounds and David, but I choose to go the other way. Instead of trying to play all the breakers to cover you against every single ice in the game, why not just keep the core poor? Account Siphon also does a lot of work against matchups where you want to float tags anyways, such as the Sync EOI matchup. You are never really gonna clear those tags from Data Raven anyway, and Gutenberg is super annoying, so why don't you just float tags and lock them at 0 credits? That's also one way you can win. When people see this deck, a lot of times they ask the question, this doesn't seem to work. You have resources that you want to keep on the board, the daily cast, the Proko, and you have the tags that you need to clear. Do you actually clear the tags? And my answer is, while they do anti-synergize, it's not the end of the world. You can clear the tags if you want to, and that is one of the skill testing parts of this deck. This is not a question I can answer a hard yes or no to. It really depends on the board state. Do you have any existing resources installed? Do you have more account siphons coming your way? Are you already most of the way through your deck? All these factors contribute to your decision of whether to float tags or not. Now, I can't really discuss siphon spam without talking about the next few cards, my R&D digging mechanisms, 2 indexings and 3 maker's eyes. This is super aggressive. You notice that immediately, this is not R&D-I. Even though R&D interface is probably superior in most Shaper decks, this is an aggressive deck, in case you haven't found out by now. By being able to leverage the burst extra 3 clicks you get every time you draw Hyperdriver, by leveraging on the huge credit swing you get from an early account siphon, indexing Maker's Eyes suddenly becomes so good. Often you don't have the tempo to install R&D interfaces, and you're not going for a late game lock. So indexing and Maker's Eyes help you close the game against a lot of corps that just outright beat you in the late game. Most notably, I was able to win against IG only because of some very early, aggressive, and lucky multi-accesses on R&D. Indexings and Maker's Eyes help you achieve that. R&D interfaces, not so much. They also give you a secondary use for your same old things. In case you don't feel like siphoning your opponent anymore because HQ is too iced up, you can always go for same old indexings on Maker's Eyes. Pretty good. Now we move on to the final few cards that are still not boxed up. These are so-called tech cards, but I don't really think of them as tech cards per se. Instead, they are just very versatile cards that happen to be very good tech in certain matchups, but do ultimately synergize with my deck in some way, shape, or form. Let's start with networking. I would not play networking in a regular Shaper deck, or Anox deck even, just to help with the Sync EOI matchup. It is in there because I run Account Siphon. So for that one influence slot, it's kind of like a career fair, except better because Career Fair only synergizes with 4 installs in my deck, the 3 casts and the Proko, whereas Networking helps me with siphons at any point during the game. And of course, serves as pretty good tech against Sync. Turns out I didn't play any Sync on the day. It would have been pretty good against Argus as well. Again, I didn't play any Argus, but it's still a tech card. There's Councilman as well. Councilman, again, it's a pretty versatile card. It helps in the Polana matchup against Marcus Batty and Caprice Nisei. It helps against the NEH matchup if you want to stall them from rezzing their Sands. And I really like it against the NEH Fast Roll matchup for de-rezzing Sensi Actors Union. That is the card that usually powers NEH up and away. And having one Councilman on a board means that you can afford to check the remotes a bit less often and still get away with not finding the Sensi Actors Unions. It is in this deck not because of all these reasons, but because it synergizes with indexing. Sometimes against asset spam, You have the indexing in hand, you really want to index, but in the back of your mind, maybe they have a Jackson on the board, I don't want to waste that indexing. With Councilman, now you can. Don't have to worry about the Jackson Howard, it's gonna get de-res with Councilman. Finally, Notoriety is such a huge card. It is one of the best responses in the game against Global Food Initiative. Through the 8 matches that I played on the day, there were 3 games where the Notoriety won me the game, including the one match versus IG, where I was able to steal 3 2-pointers. Had I needed to steal a 4th agenda, possibly a future perfect to win the game, it would have been all but impossible. But with Notoriety, I was able to sit back with my hyperdriver and same old thing, and wait till I could run all 3 centrals to same old Notoriety for the win. It's also really good against some of the 9 agenda Polana decks I played against. They don't run any future perfects, just 9 2-pointer agendas for you, because 2 of them are global foods. So having that Notoriety helps so much. Having to steal 3 of 9 instead of 4 of 9 is a big difference. Again, this is a phenomenal card that did so much heavy lifting on the day. Now we move on to what probably is the more interesting half of the video, the honorable mentions. Or to most of you, why you include this card? Alright, let's start with Film Critic. I do not need Film Critic, even though it's a pretty good card right now with all the mid-seasons and Future Perfects flying around. The reason is this: against Future Perfect, I can siphon lock my opponent to 0 credits, so stealing Future Perfects are very easy. Even against Asset Spam IG, for example, you are able to siphon them down. Even if they have Mumber Temples, they cannot use Mumber Temple credits to power up their Future Perfects. So as long as you keep your opponent poor, which you should be if you're trying to win, you don't really need a Film Critic. Moreover, even against the Sync matchup, if you're afraid of Quantum Predictive models or mid-seasons, you're gonna get tagged by Account Siphon anyway, so the Film Critic isn't gonna help much. And as I said, against mid-seasons, you can always outmoney them with their Siphon, or you can just simply tag float. Either way, the Film Critic isn't really gonna come into play. Now, some of you who have been following Netrunner DB might have seen Ben Blum's regional winning Kate list and wonder, why not Freedom through Equality? You are pretty heavy on the indexings as well. And my answer is this: besides being more expensive to play, you really need to draw it early on, which you cannot guarantee since you're only running 1 copy of it. With Notoriety, I actually had the option of sitting back and waiting until I could find a time to siege all 3 centrals to close out with the 7th point. That was not something I could do with Freedom through Equality. The ability to sit back and wait till I found enough resources and clone chips to siege all 3 centrals is the reason I won against IG and one of my spiky Polana matchups. Freedom through Equality would not have done that. Again, it must be said that this is a super aggressive deck that wants to play its indexings and Maker's Eyes at the soonest possible, before any further eyes go on R&D. With Freedom through Equality, you are incentivized to wait 1 turn longer just so that you can have enough money to ensure that you can play Freedom through Equality and all these things. For me, I just cannot afford to wait. Anytime there's an opportunity to go in for the indexing, it has to be done, and any agendas have to be stolen. That's why I think Notoriety is the right call for this deck as opposed to the current. One of the most jarring omissions of my deck is Levy AR Lab Access. Where is your Levy? I think there's a very strong tendency for people to be too tunnel visioned into certain cards after playing with them for so long, like Project Build in NBN or Jackson Howard in most decks. You have to ask yourself, do you really need the Levy? In a deck that is super aggressive, that wants to take advantage of the early game and close out the game before you go to the late game, why play a card that helps you in the late game? Because you're not going to win if you reach that late game. You do not need that Levy. You can win against IG without a Levy. Just siege the early game. Of the 8 matches I played on the day, there was not a single game where I was missing my Levy. Maybe one against a spiky Polana that nearly ran me out of options. But for the most part, you do not and should not need the Levy in a Siphon indexing deck. Now, Turning Wheel and Polop are on the list for kind of the same reason. These are 1 influence cards that could take the place of networking, and they're pretty good. The problem is, they are turned off when you go tag floating, and you're not making a lot of runs, honestly. So Indexings and siphons are high impact runs. Sharpshooter and Deus Ex are one use breakers. You're making high impact runs instead of multiple runs, hence turning wheel is not that good. Pollock, on the other hand, well, Councilman already covers Marcus Betty and Caprice Nisei for you, so you don't really need the Pollock. As for the Clot, well, if you remember I mentioned earlier, the prepaid Kate package consists of 3 clone chips, 2 ladies, and 1 mimic. None of this can be cut, which means that you only have 9 influence to spend, so if you want 2 siphons, you cannot run Clot. So instead of running Clot, I run Clot Threat. With SMCs and clone chips on the board, you have to respect the Clot Threat. Well, at least until you realize that I probably don't have enough influence to pack the Clot. But it's still pretty good when you maintain the element of surprise. Which is one of the advantages my decks have over most other people, and this is why I was able to perform so well. So that's Siphon Kate in a nutshell. Stay tuned for the next video where I showcase a game that was streamed involving my Siphon Kate. In the meantime, thanks for watching and happy net running. Goodbye.